Hey everybody, good morning. Welcome to the Pathways Church online gathering. My name is Nick. We want to welcome those of you who are on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for joining us, hanging out with us today. We're glad that you are hanging out with us. We're doing a little series on the Bible. We're talking about some problems with the Bible, and we're exploring a whole bunch of different stuff. And so this is kind of a fun time to tune in to this group and find out a little bit of what we are all about. Now, if this is your first time, just coming across this group, you can find out more about us at our website at findpathways.com. And as always, we've got our core values listed here in the bottom corner of the screen. But if you are wondering at all, what the heck do they mean by those words? You can go to our website and we spell them out a little bit more carefully, what we mean by them. Now, just as a little bit of an introduction to who we are, we usually just describe ourselves with two words, okay? I know we have our 5 core values here, which are really helpful in things that we want to value along the way. But when people come up to me and they say, well, what kind of church is this that you're a part of? I usually use these 2 words. I say that we are a cautious group and a curious group. We're cautious because many of us have grown up in religious environments and we've seen religion used in really helpful, good ways. But many of us have also seen religion used in dangerous ways, ways that have harmed maybe ourselves or people around us. And so we find ourselves, many of us in the group anyway, being a little bit cautious about organized religion. And we're definitely interested in Jesus, but there's a lot of religion that we find ourselves rather skeptical of. Now, we're also a group that's very curious. We like to ask questions, and for some of us, that's gotten us in trouble in other religious environments because we've asked a little too many questions, or we've asked those questions in religious contexts where it's like, well, you're not really supposed to ask that question. You're supposed to already know the answer to that one. And so anyway, we like to ask those questions. Many of us have gotten in trouble for asking questions, but we don't think it's a bad idea to ask questions. In fact, any religion that can't be questioned, I don't think should be trusted. So we think we should ask a lot of questions. We try to do that here. We try to take an honest assessment of things, rethink them, and ask a lot of questions. So if either of those 2 words describe you, this might be a really good community for you. Now, a couple things here today. We are going to have a little bit of singing time here. Billy, our worship leader, is going to lead us in a time of singing, and he's got a couple songs here prepared for us that he spends a lot of time on, recording these songs. He records them, and then he'll play another track behind it and record that, and then record more, and then edit it all together, and it's a lot of work. But he does this online just so that we have an opportunity to kind of participate in this form of worship as well. And the whole idea here over the next few minutes is just to kind of try to ease us into the awareness that God is here with us. And if you want to sing along, you're welcome to do that. If you're at home and you just want to sit down on the couch and listen to the music, you're welcome to do that as well. In between the 2 songs, there is going to be a little reflection video, and all of it is just aimed at focusing us towards the fact that God is with us in this moment, wherever you are in the metaverse. So anyway, we're glad that you're joining us here today. After that, we're going to come back and I'm going to do a little message on the Bible, talk about some problems in the Bible, maybe that you didn't know about. And then we will have a chance to take some communion at the end. And during our communion time, Billy is going to come back on and he is going to lead us in another song. And if you want to take communion during that time, you're welcome to do so. You just need to find a couple items around the house to do it. You might need some bread or crackers if you got something like that around the house, or maybe some juice, or maybe some wine left over from last night, something like that. You just need some bread and a cup. And they represent the body and the blood of Jesus. And it's something that Christians for a couple thousand years have taken as a way to remember Jesus' death, his burial, and his resurrection. So if you want to get some of those ready, you're welcome to participate with us in that today as well. Okay, that's pretty much all the housekeeping. Why don't we let Billy take us away into some singing, and then we'll continue on with our series today.
If my heart is so overwhelmed and I cannot hear your voice, I'll hold on to what is true. though I cannot see. If the storms of life they come and the road ahead gets steep, I will lift these hands in faith, I will believe. I'll remind myself of all that you've done and the life I have because of your Son. 'Cause love came down and rescued me, love came down and set me free, and I am yours, I am forever yours. Mountain high and valley low, I'll sing, I'll remind my soul that I am yours, I am forever yours. When my heart is filled with hope and every promise comes my way, when I feel your hands of grace rest upon me, staying desperate for you, God, staying humble at your feet, I will lift these hands in praise, I will believe. I'll remind myself of all that you've done and the life I have because of your Son. 'Cause love came down and rescued me, love came down and set me free, and I am yours, I am forever yours. Mountain high and valley low, I'll sing, I'll remind my soul that I am yours, I am forever yours. 'Cause I am yours, I am yours, all my days, Jesus, I am yours. 'Cause I am yours, I am yours, all my days, Jesus, I am yours. 'Cause love came down and rescued me, love came down and set me free, I am yours, I am forever yours. Mountain high, valley low, I'll sing out, remind my soul that I am yours, I am forever yours. 'Cause love came down and rescued me, love came down and set me free, and I am yours, I am forever yours. Mountain high and valley low, I'll sing, I'll remind my soul that I am yours, I am forever darkness, we were waiting without hope, without light, till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes to fulfill the law and prophets. To a virgin came the word, from a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom coming and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering you saw to the other side, knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for our sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. In the morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, till that soul was moved for good. For the Lamb had conquered death, and the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe. For the souls of all who come to the Father are restored, and the church was Christ was born. Then the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of old shall not kneel, shall not faint. By his blood and in his name, in his freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. Oh, and praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Oh, and praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise forever to the King of Kings. Oh, praise forever to the King of Kings.
I think the difficulty we have is that questions about the historicity of Genesis, questions about the historicity of Adam and Eve, get caught up in contemporary, particularly American culture. And as a Brit looking across the Atlantic, I see this rather more clearly, because these are not questions which you regularly find asked in Britain at all. Occasionally on the side, but they're not big, buzzy issues. And they're certainly not umbilically linked to political issues, which is clearly the case here in America. But that then causes all sorts of problems, that people line up the political issues. You've got culture wars going on with the left and the right. You've got big political issues. And again, your political issues. I know a lot of Americans, just like a lot of English people, don't understand French politics. So a lot of Americans don't understand that the rest of the world really doesn't do it like that. We don't bundle up the issues that way, whether it's gun laws or abortion or whatever. We just don't make those connections. So that then the question of Genesis, history or myth, these words are hooked in to whole great lists of other things, and people are afraid that if you start wobbling about there, oh my goodness, you're going to be denying this, you're going to be affirming that. And we need to lighten up, we need to uncouple those issues, and we need to say, okay, Genesis is one of those books, like a Shakespeare play or like a Beethoven symphony or something, where you can describe what it sort of literally says. Here's a Beethoven symphony, here are the notes, da, 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 da. And you think, well, that doesn't actually catch what's going on in this. And you want to use bigger language about the opening of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, or say that this is an amazing statement about the power of empire and the fate of man and goodness knows what. You still got to play the notes. And in the same way, I want to say Genesis 1, 2 and 3 are some of the most explosive chapters. And when anthropologists talk about myth, what they mean is not an untrue story. What they mean is a story which is full of power for how we understand ourselves individually, for how we understand ourselves as a community, for how we understand what the human project is all about, and some of its paradoxes and tragedies and so on. The mythological element, however, has got misunderstood to be, if it's myth, therefore it isn't history, and vice versa. And that's just for starters. We need to lighten up about these words and maybe find some other words, because I do think it matters that something like a primal pair getting it wrong did happen. But that doesn't mean I'm saying that therefore Genesis is kind of positivist, literal, clunky history over against myth. Far from it. I think, for instance, that the 6 days of Genesis, I'm with John Walton from Wheaton College on this, I think the 6 days of Genesis would be interpreted in terms of this is how you describe how people make a temple or a tabernacle. This is a way of saying that when the good Creator God made the world, he made heaven and earth as the space in which he himself was going to dwell, and he shared the earth bit with human creatures. And, you know, to flatten that out into this is simply telling us that the world was made in 6 days is almost perversely to avoid the real thrust of the narrative. And when I then find that people who say, oh, it must have been made in 6 days, etc., also have a very dualistic view about how one day God is going to throw the present space-time universe in the trash can and leave us all sitting on a cloud playing a harp, I say, clearly you just haven't been reading the same Bible. The meaning of Genesis is that this world was made to be God's abode, God's home, God's dwelling. He's shared it with us, and he now wants to rescue it and redeem it. So that we have to read Genesis for all it's worth, and to say either history or myth is a way of saying, I'm not going to study this text for all it's worth. I'm just going to flatten it out so that it conforms to the cultural questions that my culture today is telling me to ask. And I think that's a form of actually being unfaithful to the text itself.
Hey, love those words from N.T. Wright. Really great there. Is it myth or is it history? And can something have some history but also be told in the form of a myth? Hey, we're going to talk about that a little bit today, but that is not exactly where I want to start. I want to start not talking about myth and history. I want to start by talking about basketball because I love basketball. And the NBA playoffs are on, and we have been watching that in my household. And also, there is a special HBO series, I guess, on the Lakers that's been playing over the last few weeks, and I think Adam McKay wrote it. It's a great little story about the LA Lakers. If you were around for the Showtime Lakers back in the 80s, it's just kind of fun to relive some fictional stories there, but I love those Lakers. I loved Magic Johnson. I mean, I was a huge fan of Magic Johnson as a kid. In fact, we would go out on the playground as kids, playing basketball with friends and stuff, and we'd all choose which character we were going to be, and I was always Magic. In fact, I took it to such an extreme that in school, I would even sign all my papers Magic Lloyd because I just wanted to be Magic Johnson. I mean, I thought that I was him, and just loved Magic Johnson, just loved watching him play. He did something I just had really never seen before. And that's why it was so difficult and so devastating on that November day when he came out and announced that he had acquired HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. And I remember he came out in this big press conference, and there were tears all the way around the room. I remember the car I was driving in, listening on the radio live as he was making this announcement because it was such a big deal. And just thinking, wow, like Magic Johnson is going to die, like it was just this hugely deflating moment. This was the biggest hero that I had in life at that time. And he is announcing his mortality. He's sick with something at the time we thought was a death sentence, and often it was. I understand today HIV is kind of a manageable chronic situation, but back then in the early 90s, it was really a death sentence. And I remember just how devastated I felt listening to that press conference. I felt disillusioned. I mean, here was my hero. He was bigger than life. He was like a superhero. I mean, it was like he was immortal. But now, at this press conference, I saw that he was flawed and mortal. He was human. And weirdly, it caused sort of a crisis of faith because it's hard to discover something that you idolized isn't what you thought that it was. And I was worried that Magic Johnson would die, but part of me that day died too. Now, this has happened in a deeper way for me and perhaps with you when it comes to the Bible. When I got to a certain age, I discovered that there were some things about the Bible that I did not previously know. And there were some things that as I discovered them seemed very human, very problematic, that seemed to make the Bible text very mortal. And I had a similar crisis of faith. We're doing a series called Construction Zone, and we're doing several seasons of it. This season, we're focusing in on the Bible, and what we're doing is we're taking a look at the material of the Bible itself. Now, oftentimes in our sermon series, we're taking a book of the Bible, and we're going through it, and we're talking about what it means, its cultural influence, its what it meant back then, how it can be applied today, all that type of stuff. But right now, we're really just taking an overview of the entire Bible itself and talking about what this material is. What is it exactly? How should it be used? And how should we view it? And so we're asking a lot of questions. And we're beginning to notice some things that perhaps we didn't know before. And this series here exists for us to ask a lot of questions, reassess some things we previously believed about the Bible, and perhaps rethink them. And this series, it involves some deconstruction, where we're getting rid of some old ideas that perhaps we used to have. And some reconstruction, where we're finding new ways to think about the Bible and its role and its place in our faith. And I understand living in a construction zone where you're tearing things down that seem vitally important and rebuilding new things, it seems a little unnerving sometimes, it seems a little scary, but it is the process of growth. And the whole point of this, I just want you to remember from the very beginning, is not to lower your view of the Bible so that you throw it away, disregard it, say it has no value to you anymore. But actually, the whole purpose of this exercise is to help you appreciate the Bible text even more. and discover something better there than perhaps you had ever even imagined. And that's what all this work has done for me. I hope it's doing that for you. But first, we have to tear out some old ideas. And last week, we discovered some giant problems in the Bible. Then we used the story of David and Goliath. That's a little giant pun there. We used the story of David and Goliath, right, as a case study for a category of problems in the Bible that are contradictions or perhaps just human errors in the Bible text. And for some of you, this was sort of that Magic Johnson moment, right? It was like the press conference where you realized that this Bible text wasn't quite everything that you thought that it was. In fact, somebody came up to me after church last week and was like, I didn't know any of that stuff. Like, I didn't realize that the Bible had so many contradictions in it. And they were like, wow, I got to figure out what to do with all of that. And so, it was, Nick ruins the Bible for us once again here. And so I'd like to say that we're going to stop that today and and get away from those problems. But instead, we are going to talk about some more problems in the Bible today. And the reason that we're going to do this is I believe that we really need to just kind of get all this stuff out in the open and clear the space away so that we can rebuild stuff. We don't want to be dishonest about anything. We don't want to gloss over anything. And certainly you'll hear these things out in pop culture, and we might as well just discuss them and talk about them openly. And so today I want to share with you 4 other categories of problems in the Bible. We looked at one category last week, which was contradictions and human errors. I'm going to share with you 4 other categories of problems in the Bible today in my effort to ruin the Bible for you. No, that's not what we're trying to do, okay? But I want you to be aware of these problem areas. Now, I keep calling them problems, but I just want you to know I don't really think of them that way anymore, okay? I used to think that these were problems, things I had to ward off and defend against and come up with answers to. I used to think of them as very problematic. I no longer think of them that way. I actually think of them as like features. When you find a product, and it lists all the features, those are the positive things, right? I actually consider all of these things now in the features list, not the problems list. But for our present discussion, I will use this word problem because for many of us, we have viewed the Bible text as something that we've idolized. It's perfect. It has no human flaws, human grittiness to it. And so today we'll refer to some of these problems here. So let me share with you a couple other categories that we didn't get to last week. And we're going to focus in on 3 of them, and we'll save the 4th one really for another time. The first other category of problems in the Bible, besides just contradictions and human errors, is the overlap of many of the biblical stories with other ancient stories. Now, you may have heard this if you watch the History Channel and all those other type of things. People like to do sensational things like, did you know that the Bible actually copied other stories from ancient times? And yeah, to some extent, that is true. There are some other well-known ancient stories that are very similar to the Bible, some of which are actually quite a bit older than our Bible stories. So this is true, and a great example of this is a work called Enuma Elish. It's a Babylonian creation myth story. It was discovered in the mid-1800s, 1849, I think, in the Great Library at Nineveh, which, by the way, if you're looking for Nineveh on a map, you'll have to go to Iraq and the town of Mosul. It's kind of right in the Nineveh area, right? So Enuma Elish is this Babylonian creation myth story, okay? And we're going to talk a little bit more about myth, but this is a story about the creation of the world, or the order of the world, putting things in order, because you remember in an ancient mindset, really, to create something wasn't to create it out of air, out of nothing. It was more to put order to chaos, to arrange things in a way that made sense. Now, the Enuma Elish is a creation narrative, a creation myth story, and it has a lot of similarities with the creation stories in Genesis 1 and somewhat in Genesis 2. Now, we talked about this because we did a series on Genesis, but we didn't talk about all the specific similarities between Genesis and some earlier ancient works, but there are a lot of similarities to Enuma Elish. For instance, everything in both stories starts in darkness. Okay? That's a pretty big deal. Another similarity is creation, or this ordering, happens in 6 days and then there is a rest. Okay? Same in both stories. At the beginning of creation in both stories, the world was mostly water. It starts with the waters of chaos. Water represents chaos in the ancient world, and we'll talk about why that is here in a little bit. Both stories start really early in the creation account with separating these waters. You know, the waters up above, which is up in the air in the sky, because they look up and they see blue up there. They think, well, that's got to be water, right? And the waters down below. And we see in both stories this separation of the waters above and the waters below. In both stories, God makes the lights in the sky, the sun, the moon, and the stars to denote the passage of time and calendar events. And then in both stories, the last creature to be made is humans. And if you read both of these, you'll notice that there are a lot of striking similarities. In fact, some scholars say that this is so similar that these Bible writers and editors must have known of Enuma Elish. It existed before the Genesis material was created, and they may have just used it as a guide to write their own story, right? They just kind of looked at it and changed the name of the god. And maybe, but I don't think it's probably that simple, because these stories do have some significant differences as well. But this isn't the only story that has similarity to other Bible stories. There's another work that you may have heard of called the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it has a flood narrative that reads a lot like the story of Noah from Genesis 6 forward, right? The big flood story, build that ark, get all the animals on there, it's going to rain for 40 days and 40 nights. There's a lot, you remember that story in the Old Testament. Well, the Epic of Gilgamesh has a different hero, not named Noah, but a different hero here, and tells a very similar story. The Epic of Gilgamesh is a Mesopotamian poem. It was discovered around the same time as Enuma Elish, and it's written on 12 tablets and composed somewhere around 3000 BC, so before our Old Testament stuff. And on tablet 11, it tells this flood story that is an older story than the story in Genesis. Now, the similarities here are pretty striking. First of all, it describes a flood of the entire known world. Now, we might say, okay, that I don't know if that flood was around the whole world, but the point is, for the ancient writers, they believed it covered the whole world because they didn't know about how big the world was, right? And so both seem to describe a flood that covers the known world. In both stories, the flood is caused because of human sins, human mistakes, and is sent as a punishment by a deity, God, or this other deity. In both stories, there is a hero who is told to build a boat, and he sort of complains about it at first, but does do it. In both stories, the boat is filled with this hero's family and animals, right? It becomes sort of a floating zoo to save all the animals and preserve a couple people here as the earth is flooded in water. That's the same in both stories. In both stories, the flood comes with rain. Heavy rainfall leads to flood. In both stories, at the end, the boat lands on the top of a mountain as the waters recede. In both stories, I mean, this is a pretty minute detail. In both stories, birds are released to test whether or not there is dry land out there. In both stories, there is a sacrifice at the end of the whole ordeal to the deity. And at the end, in both stories, there is a blessing from the deity over the hero. Now, again, not all the details are the same, and there are some pretty significant differences, but these stories are very similar, the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Noah story. And the Epic of Gilgamesh is, again, dated earlier. And so it seems impossible that Bible writers and editors would have been unaware of a story like the Epic of Gilgamesh flood story. In fact, when it comes to flood stories, they're really a bunch of them. There's over 24 of various flood stories with similar details floating around the ancient Near East time period. So there's a bunch of flood stories that the Bible writers would have been aware of, okay? But that's not it. There's more, okay? It's a little thing we call the Code of Hammurabi. Hammurabi was a Babylonian king who reigned from about 1795 to 1750 BC, and he is remembered today for promoting and enforcing an organized code of laws. And the Code of Hammurabi was discovered on a stele in 1901, and it's one of the best preserved and comprehensive ancient writings of significant length that has ever been found. And the Hammurabi Code is divided into 12 sections and has about 282 laws. And when you read them, there are significant similarities between the Code of Hammurabi and things like the Ten Commandments. And further legal code in Israel's history that we looked at in our Exodus series called the Book of the Covenant. Okay, the two big law code given in Exodus is the Ten Commandments and the Book of the Covenant. And when you read those, there are a lot of similarities to material that is older from the Code of Hammurabi. In fact, it appears that there's many stuff that has just been taken and adopted into this Israelite law book. It's very, very similar. But there's more than this, right? There's even just regular ancient protocol. For instance, all ancient Near East groups had temples and priests and prophets and sacrificial systems, and a lot of it looks very similar to ancient Israel's religious protocol, okay? Even religious imagery, okay? There's all this imagery associated with Yahweh in the Old Testament, but it looks a lot like imagery in stories of other gods around the ancient Near East at the time. For instance, imagery of the deity dwelling on a sacred mountain, like Yahweh lives on Mount Sinai, right? All sorts of other ancient Near East gods lived up on top of a holy mountain. Or the idea that the deity rode down on thundering clouds or threw thunderbolts or lightning like arrows, or created wind by blowing out the deity's mouth, or enjoyed the sweet aroma of sacrifices. This is all imagery that's used about God in the Old Testament, but it is not unique to the Israel's conception of God at all. This is all the same type of language floating around the ancient Near East world about other deities as well. Okay, so there's a lot of overlap in our Bible with other stories of other groups of people worshiping other gods and goddesses in the same time period or even before. And so this becomes, for those of us who first discover this, a problem. Because we wonder, is the Bible plagiarized? I mean, did they just steal these stories and co-opt them and change a few? You know how it is when you're just copying your neighbor's homework and you just kind of put your own name on it, right? Is that what happened here? And this really bothered me at first when I first learned about the similarities between all these stories. You know, you just think, how could this possibly be? It seems like they were just copying these stories. And yet, a story of a hero god overcoming a sea of chaos and bringing order, creating things, was a popular ancient story. Not just Enuma Elish, but many other similar stories were floating around the ancient world. It was sort of the context of the day. Everybody sort of believed some version of that. And so you can imagine, if you are an ancient Israelite and you are going to tell the story of your own God's power over chaos, this is sort of the cultural way you know how to express it. You don't have to be plagiarizing. It's just the way your context has taught you to think and to tell the story. And so you tell your own version of the same story in order to let people know that your God is the one in control. It's a primitive human way of describing God. Same thing with ancient mythic stories like the story of Gilgamesh. Ancient people lived in a world where stories like that explained the world and people's connection to the gods. Myth stories are an explanation of the world, how things came to be. Why does it rain sometimes and it doesn't rain other times? Well, there has to be a reason for that. We don't know weather phenomena yet. We don't know how all that works. We don't have Doppler radar, and we don't understand climate and all that kind of stuff. So they had to figure out, how does it rain sometimes and not rain other times? And so it must be the gods in control of the levers. And so they would tell the stories this way. This was sort of the science of their day. It's the framework for how everyone viewed the world. And so it really shouldn't surprise us that when these biblical writers come to write the story of their God, that these ancient Israelites do it using the language of their time to do it. Not just the vocabulary of their language, but the conceptual understanding, the very stories floating around in their context, that they would use those stories like other groups, but with their God as the epicenter. What they're doing is they're writing what they know. This is a human description of God. And that's the Bible. Now, perhaps this isn't a problem. Perhaps, when understood correctly, this is actually a feature, because God is letting his people, his kids, tell the story through their own perspective. And when we understand it that way, maybe we're not trying to be deceived or turn in someone else's homework. Perhaps we just see people explaining God using the language and tools they have in their moment. Now, we see this in another problem category called the pre-modern view of the world, because the Bible writers have the same perspective of basically how the world works as other ancient people do. A picture that we know today is not correct at all. Okay, I want to show you a picture here of how ancient people thought of the world, and we see this depiction all throughout the Old Testament. Specifically, we see it a ton there. And this is how the ancient people thought of how the earth and the world was ordered, okay? They saw the earth held up by pillars, that there was ground, and then obviously there was lower waters. They could see water like the sea around them, right? But when they would look up in the sky, they would see that the sky is blue. And so they would say, that's got to be water up there too. But how did this water not just fall down on them and overwhelm them? Well, the only way that could be is that up there must be a hard, clear firmament, a barrier that is holding back the ocean water up above. Okay? And so, but sometimes they would see that this water would fall out of the sky onto them. And so what they believed that there were actually floodgates up there holding back this ocean of water up above them. That occasionally God, who lived up above that ocean on other pillars up in heaven, right, which was ordered up above that sometimes he would let like rain and snow and hail through, and he would just kind of open these gates like irrigation gates, right? And some of the water would fall through. And so this was their picture of how the ancient world, how the world worked. They thought the world worked this way, and so they write about it. In fact, look at this. Genesis 1, verse 7. So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it, and it was so. Well, see, the Genesis writer here is telling us, hey, here's how the world works. There's this invisible barrier that's hard that holds back the waters up above. Job tells us a similar thing. Job is kind of describing the power of God. And at one point in Job 37, he says, can you join him in spreading out the skies hard as mirror of cast bronze? What he's describing here is, hey, God was able to make this hard force that held back the waters up there in the sky. Can you do something similar? Genesis 7, in the story of Noah, right? And it says in the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth for 40 days. It says the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Now, when we say the floodgates really opened up today, what we mean is, dang, it is raining hard. It's a figure of speech, okay? We're just saying it's raining really hard. And we may be tempted to read this text the same way. But that is not at all what the author of Genesis means. The author of Genesis means this very literally, that those floodgates from the cosmology diagram here, that those opened up and the water came through, and that is what started the flood. You get it? Now, no matter what you think about the story of Noah being true or not true, we know that this detail for sure is incorrect, okay? Whatever else you want to think about the rest of the story of Noah, we know that this is just not factual, that there are not gates holding back water in the sky, and that God opens them occasionally and lets the rain come through. You see what I'm saying here? We get a perspective in the Bible that we today know is just not true. Another example of this, Isaiah 24 says the floodgates of the heavens are opened, the foundations of the earth shake. Okay, so rain happens when the floodgates are open, but we get another phenomenon described here, and that is an earthquake. And what is an earthquake? Well, an earthquake is the foundations of the earth shaking us on the pillars above. Because look at the diagram here. What they believed is there's the land, right? And then there's water under the land. And then there are the foundations of the earth, and pillars are holding up the land that we actually live on. So if something shakes the foundation of the earth, it shakes those pillars and it rattles us up above. And that is what Isaiah 24 is describing. Job 9:6 gives us another picture of this, right? He, God, shakes the earth from its place and makes its pillars tremble. Okay? This is an ancient way of thinking about the earth. It has nothing to do with science, right? It is just how they conceived of the earth. Job 26, same thing. The pillars of the heavens quake, aghast at his rebuke. Okay, now we have here in this text, it appears that we've got an earthquake even happening in heaven, because if we look at our cosmology diagram again here, notice that heaven itself also sits on pillars up above the ocean in the sky. All right, Psalm 104. This stuff is just everywhere. It's just all over the Old Testament, okay? Psalm 104 gives us a ton of imagery this way. Psalm 104 verse 2, the Lord wraps himself in light as with a garment. He stretches out the heavens like a tent, right? And lays the beams of his upper chambers on their waters. What is that describing here? Well, in our cosmology diagram, it's describing heaven living on pillars up above that ocean in the sky. Psalm 104 verse 5, he set the earth on its foundations. Okay, that's not figurative. This writer of Psalms here is meaning that literally. He literally believes that there is a foundation of the earth and that we sit on pillars. It can never be moved. You covered it with the watery depths as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. But at your rebuke the waters fled, and the sound of your thunder took flight. They flowed over the mountains. They went down into the valleys to the place you assigned for them. You set a boundary they cannot cross. Never again will they cover the earth. You see, this is this idea of water is a really big deal in this ancient cosmology, because water is all around you. If you look above you, there's water. If you look around you, you see these oceans, it's just water that goes on forever, like the sky. And so water becomes the unknown. Water is chaos. And so God must set boundaries on it, right? That's why this idea of creation being ordering things is actually the most powerful thing they can think of, because they think, what could possibly order the water back away into its proper place where it doesn't just come and overwhelm us? I mean, they must have been claustrophobic all the time. You got an ocean above you and an ocean underneath you. And what is holding all of this back? And so what they're saying is, this God's so powerful, he can set boundaries on that so it does not come. Okay, so all this is just to show you that when we read this Bible material, it's not just in one place, it's all over the place. We're reading people describing the earth in the way that they assume that it actually works. The Bible is giving this ancient view of how the world works, but today we know through science that that is false, that is not at all how the world really works. And back when I needed the Bible to be perfect, this became a problem for me, because here we have biblical authors ascribing reality that we know is not true. Forget about Genesis 1 being just literal science. I mean, many authors seem just as confused about the reality of the world as their pagan neighbors. They think the same way as all these other godless folks. And so how could this be the revelation of God? Well, again, if it's written from the perspective of humans, and it doesn't need to be a handwritten letter from God, perhaps this isn't quite as problematic. But let's move on to another category of problems, and that is that history, sometimes in the Bible, stories that are told as history might not actually be history the way that we think of them, okay? Because there are some events in the Bible that seem to not have happened exactly the way the Bible says that they happened. Now, we saw some contradiction in stories, right? Last week we looked at David and Goliath, and we saw the same writer ascribing the death of Goliath to two different people, and so we have some contradiction there. But sometimes in the Bible, we read some stories and we're not sure that things happened at all, or that they happened nearly in any way closely to the way that the Bible tells about them. The great example of this would be Exodus, and we did a great series on this a few months back. If you want to go back and look up our series on Exodus, I think you'll learn a lot about it there. But what we discovered is there is really no archaeological evidence that the story of the Exodus, and then beyond that, the conquest of Canaan, where the Israelite people come into the Promised Land, and they, through war, drive out the people who are living there, the walls of Jericho falling down and all that. We discovered that there's really no archaeological evidence for any of this. And in fact, I'd say most Old Testament scholars today believe that the actual events in history did not look at all like the way the Bible story tells it. I mean, there's no record in Egyptian literature or any other literature of the story of the Exodus like we read in the Bible. You'd think with the sun going dark and the plagues happening and the firstborn dying and like all the stuff that happens there, that's pretty significant. You'd think somebody might have written that down besides the Bible authors and saying this is a terrible time period. And some people say, well, they would have been really embarrassed by that. They didn't want to tell the story of their defeat. And yet, that's not how the ancients did it. The ancient people talked about their defeats all the time. They just ascribed it to their gods being angry at them. They didn't try to hide it away. And certainly some of the neighbors in the region, in the general area around there in that region, would have included this somehow, but there's no other record other than the biblical narrative. There's really no archaeological support for the story of this Exodus of, several million Jews packing up out of Egypt and wandering around the desert for 40 years and making their way into the Promised Land. You'd think if that happened, that perhaps they would have left some stuff behind, some pottery here, you're camping in the wilderness for 40 days. I go camping for like 2 nights and I've left something out there, right? But there's no evidence whatsoever of a mass migration at all. And there's no evidence really at any time of a conquest or war happening where Israelite people came into Palestine and took over. In fact, there's evidence to the contrary that shows that Jewish people probably made their way into Palestine over a long period of time, slowly, not all at once, with little to no violence. So what do we do with stuff like this? History told in such a way that doesn't look like how it may have actually happened. Now, it seems like something happened in the Exodus story. It seems unlikely that somebody just made that whole story up whole cloth. First of all, who would make up a story of national origin that way? It seems like there must be some historical reality behind the story of Exodus, but it also seems unlikely that it happened exactly like the Bible said. So, is stuff like this just worthless? Well, here's a helpful idea. We learned it in our Exodus series. A guy named Dr. Peter Enns has a great kind of phrase he coined here: mythicized history. And what he means by this is that is a story that is rooted in a historical fact but has been adapted for theological purposes, right? Parts of this story have been mythicized or spiritualized. It's history, but the intent was not to just tell history the way that we would record it today. As moderns, we're very preoccupied with, trying to objective history of here's how it happened, and this is when this happened, and this is when that happened. But that the ancient people weren't all that interested in telling history that way. They told it through the lens of a genre of ancient myth. And myth, it sounds sort of scary to us, but we also saw this in our series on Genesis and Exodus, the use of myth as a genre. Myth as an ancient genre doesn't mean something that's fake or made up. It's simply these stories, as N.T. Wright told us, these stories with power. Stories that tied ancient people to their theology and made sense of everyday events. And they weren't trying to lie to anyone. They weren't trying to deceive us. They were just trying to communicate and teach how God was connected to everything. And this is how they did it. And would you, as a modern person in 2022, do it this way? No. Does it seem weird to read history that's been mythicized this way? Yes, to us today it does. But this was written by people who lived thousands and thousands of years ago that did not live at all in the same world as us. They didn't have science to explain things, right? They lived in an entirely different world than us. And they had these myth stories that helped them make sense of things. And so that's how they communicated truth. Peter Enns says it this way: a myth is a story about the gods at the dawn of time that help explain why things are the way they are here and now. So myth is just a genre of theology that helped ancient people understand how God ordered the chaos. It's a common ancient way of teaching theology and using stories to communicate theological realities. But when I first encountered these histories, like Exodus, and when I first went to a Bible college and realized that, wow, a lot of my professors don't believe this happened the way that the Bible says it happened, all I could see was that the Bible was flawed and human. It was another one of those Magic Johnson moments where I was thinking that I was not sure what to do with the text anymore. I was very disillusioned. Now, there's another category that I don't really want to spend too much time on today, but we'll talk about later, and that is another problem category in the Bible is morally offensive stories and pictures of God, right? We have all these stories, multiple stories in the Bible where people do things, or sometimes even God commands people to do things that we look on and we think, ooh, that's not good, right? That is morally bad. If you did that, or even if you told somebody to do that, you should probably go to jail or worse, right? And there's plenty of this, especially in the Old Testament. God ordering entire populations of people, including women and children, to be completely destroyed. There's all sorts of things we can point to, and we will spend just one sermon discussing some of those. But those are our 4 categories of problems here with the Bible. So the question is, what do we do? Well, as I see it, we've got sort of 3 choices here. We can choose one of 3 doors to walk through, okay? As we learn all this information about the humanity of the Bible and learn the Bible for all its flaws, I feel like we've basically got 3 choices here. We can choose door number 1, and door number 1 is simply ignore it. We can pretend this doesn't exist and not deal with it. We can pretend that everything I just said isn't true. We can pretend that everything we learned last week isn't true. And we can just kind of go on with our lives with our fingers in our ears saying like, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to know about it. I just read it. I think everything in there is completely true. There's no problems. We can just go forward ignoring it. And I don't know. Ignorance is bliss, they say. But once you've learned these things, it's pretty hard, at least for me, to just ignore it. So our second option, if we take door number 2, is just to defend it, right? And I think this is where I first ended up when I first started being confronted with some of this material, is I just wanted to defend it. I wanted to find out, okay, well, how do I protect my view of the Bible here? All this information is sort of eroding the view of the Bible that I had, so I need to somehow defend that. And I would just kind of try to find all these things to explain away why 2 people are said to have killed David, and I would try to find a different way to explain why the Bible writers said that the sky was held up by pillars and things like that, right? But the problem is, many of those defenses just didn't seem to be adequate. And I felt like I couldn't have any intellectual honesty. And at least for me, this door doesn't work either. And so we're left with a third door, and that is to embrace it. To come to grips with it. Not to ignore it, sweep it under the rug, not to try to defend it, but lean into it, to face it head on, to allow it to perhaps change our perspective of what the Bible text is, but to be willing to trust that God can show us a way for this Bible to still be useful, formative, instructional, and authoritative in our lives. I mean, 2 Timothy 3:16 says all scripture is God-breathed, and it's useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. Now, this verse doesn't say that the Bible is perfect. It doesn't say that this material that you've got has no human elements to it. It doesn't say that this is the direct perspective of God, and it's the only thing. Every position in here is directly from the mouth of God himself. No, it says it's God breathed, and it's useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. And is it possible that a very human Bible can still be useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness? See, can we find a way through door 3 where we acknowledge that there are some human issues within the Bible, but we don't need to defend them or ignore them, and it doesn't need to derail us? At first, it might be a little shocking. It feels sort of like a hero that we've idolized has announced he's sick. We might experience a little disillusionment. But perhaps if we open that door and walk through, if we engage the Bible on its own terms, meet the Bible as it is, not the way that we wish that it was, it could be that we might find something better. Maybe we'll find that we're invited to a richer, fuller, more fascinating conversation than we ever thought possible. Maybe we'll actually even hear God speak through the text in deeper ways than our old view allowed us. You know, it turns out Magic Johnson, he didn't die of HIV. He lived. Still alive today. In complete remission, it appears. In fact, he even came back to the NBA for a while. Played another season or so. He became a successful businessman. And that November day when he announced that he had HIV, I thought his life was over, and really, it was just beginning. And perhaps that's how faith will work for us. Sometimes you have to let some things go in order for something else more beautiful to live. And I would contend that that is maturity, that is growth, and it's the work of faith. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 11, Paul says this. He says, "When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror, but then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known." See, Paul's saying here, I learned some things over time. I didn't see everything clearly at the beginning. I don't see it all clearly now. But he's saying that his perspective changed over time. And perhaps that's a good encouragement to us. Some of us have had some ways of thinking about the Bible. Especially, we were taught some of them, especially when we were children, when we were kids. And they may have been helpful at the time. It's hard to feel too upset about some of those perspectives, because even though I don't hold them anymore, it helped me get where I am today. It was a good place to start. But we aren't kids anymore. And it's time to put children's views behind us and take an adult look at the text. And I just want to encourage you, if you're willing to walk through door 3, God can handle it. And the text, it can stand up to it. And it might just be that you discover something deeper than you'd ever seen before. That's where I want to end today. We have a lot to rebuild, but it's important that we clear the ground first. And notice that it's okay to challenge some previous thoughts. And in light of new information, find new ways of thinking about things. We're going to go to the table, communion table this morning. And as we go to communion, that represents a real transition in thought, doesn't it? The cross is demonstrating for us that it's trying to change our mind about something. We believe that power through violence or coercion or whatever else is the most powerful force in the world. And yet at the cross, Jesus demonstrates that that's not true at all. He helps us to reassess what is truly power. And he defines power for us through love and sacrifice, demonstrating that the most powerful force in the world is someone willing to lay down his life. And Jesus triumphs over evil on the cross, not by picking up a sword, but by hanging on a cross. He's changing our mind about something. And as we remember that today, we pledge allegiance as we've been converted in our imagination of what is possible because of what God has done at the cross. We want to remember that this morning. Billy's going to play a song for us. We're going to go to take communion if you'd like to do that, and then I'll come back for some announcements here at the end. Let me pray for us. Hey, God, we're thankful for the Bible that we have. Sometimes it's scary to rethink some things that we thought about the Bible, but it's encouraging also to know that we don't need to hide from these things or feel that we need to defend it. We've just got the Bible as it is, and thank you that you speak through something so human, the way you've done incarnationally through you, Jesus, becoming God, becoming human, that you've sort of done that through the Bible all along, that you've spoken through the human voices. And we thank you for that. We thank you that the human perspective is so included in this text because it's what connects with us. Help us to discover then how through these flaws, through these gritty, dirty human parts of the Bible, we can begin to hear your voice as well. We trust that you'll lead us there, and it's in your name we pray. Amen. All right, let's go to communion together.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever bring. We live for you. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Sing holy, holy. There is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. and I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken, and I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart, and lead me in your love to those around me. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart, and lead me in your love to those around me. And I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. Oh, Lord, Lord, Lord. I will not be shaken. I will not be shaken. Oh, I will build my life upon your name. I'm pursuing you alone, and I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken.
Amen. Thanks, Billy. That's such a good song, too, because the foundation of our faith is really on Jesus himself and his way of life, his love. Sometimes we try to build our faith's foundation off something like the Bible, it being perfect, inerrant, whatever. And I would contest that is not a good foundation for our faith. Our faith is on Jesus himself. And we're going to talk about that over the next few weeks of how to rebuild that on the life and the person of Jesus himself instead of some idolized version of the Bible. Okay, let me give you a couple announcements here as we wrap up. I got some kind of fun stuff to share with you. First of all, if you want to give and support the Pathways Church community, there's really easy ways to do that, and I would encourage you to do that. If there's anything in these online gatherings that you found just helpful or useful, you can support the fact that we're continuing to share information and content like this by helping us out financially. You can go to our website at findpathways.com/donate, and you can set up a one-time gift or a recurring gift on there, and you can help us out that way, and we would really appreciate that. But I've got a couple things. There's several people in our community that are involved in stuff, Pathwaysian people that are doing neat stuff, and we want to be involved with it. First of all, there's an Edmonds Jazz Walk that's coming up. It's this really fun time coming up here in just a week or so, May 21st, and it is just a collection of jazz music, and our own Jake Bergevin helps organize this. They're bringing in professional jazz musicians. It's a really neat time. You can go to this thing. It costs you about $40 to attend, and you can see all these really high-end jazz artists and have a fun time doing that. But they also need some volunteers, and if you want to volunteer, you can just, sign up and check wristbands at the door for a couple hours. And if you do that, guess what? You get to go for free. So if you want to be a part of that, there's a sign up at the signup.com, but it's kind of a long thing. You could take a screenshot of this, I suppose, and go to that website. Or you could just find that little email there on the right hand of the corner screen here, jazzclubsnorthwest@gmail.com. Just email them and say, hey, I really want to volunteer here and help out, and you can be a part of that. It's fun. Jake's a part of this, and we like supporting things that people in the Pathways church community are doing, and so you can be a part of that. Another thing that's coming up soon is one of our own Pathwaysian people, Dan Merchant, who lives in Spokane, tunes in with us online all the times, come out in person and visited with us. Many of you have gotten a chance to meet him. He makes TV shows for a living. What a fun thing to do. And he has a new TV show that is produced by Sony, put up by Sony and their streaming platform called PureFlix. And PureFlix has mostly been a lot of kind of cheesy Christian content, I guess I would say. But they're trying to add more content out there. And he's written a really thoughtful and creative show called Going Home. And it has to do with a hospice nurse. And she is helping people transition in their lives as they're getting ready to pass away. And there's some stuff in their life that has sort of unresolved tensions or things that are going on in their life, and so she's helping them resolve that as they get ready to transition to die as well. And so it's a show that kind of tries to help you think differently about life and death, and I actually have a trailer for it that I'd love to show for you. And I have the permission of Sony to show it, but will I get flagged by the bots here on Facebook and YouTube? Probably. But just so we know, I do have the permission to show it. So here, just a quick 1-minute trailer of Going Home.
I call on you, God. Give me your ear and hear my prayer. People misunderstand death.
The troubles that you carry.
It isn't the opposite of life. It's a part of life.
I take care of Betty.
We're going to walk her home together.
I'm praying for a miracle. Why is that wrong?
It's not. You can pray for more. Courage. Peace.
They can't help Randall. You can.
Can you keep your smile even when you're upset?
I'm excited to see what heaven turns out to be.
You have new memories to make. I know you're moving, even when I can't see it.
You make your way home.
Yeah, so that's coming out here June 2nd really soon, and super excited for it. I got to do a little graphic work on it, so I've seen a few little things that I created in the show, which is fun. And Dan wrote the show, he's producing the show, and directing the show. So super, really fun just to see one of our own Pathways people involved in something fun like this. And I'll be giving you some more information about how you can watch the show and support it going forward. It's fun to support things that Pathways people are doing. Okay, another thing coming up, Theology Pub. We did one this last week, and we're doing our North version this week on Thursday. We're meeting in Marysville at Five Rights Brewing at 6:30 p.m. on Thursday. We're going to be getting together. We're going to talk about doubt. And a couple weeks, last month, we talked about faith. What is it? This time we're going to talk about doubt. Is doubt the enemy of faith? Or actually, how might it be of some sort of value? And so if you want to join us, you're welcome. Anyone's welcome to join us. up at Five Rights Brewing in Marysville this Thursday at 6:30 p.m. if you would like to. Then also, if you just like to get information, announcements and stuff that's going on in the church community, you can join our email newsletter if you're not already a part of that. If you want to message us on Facebook or email me, my email's on the screen there. I would be happy to add you to the email list. Okay, that's pretty much it for today. Hope you have a really great week. Next week, we're going to look at some of the moral problems of the Bible, some stories that you look at and you say, that doesn't really seem like the God that I know in Jesus. And we're going to talk about how we might be able to begin to still hear the voice of God, even in some of these morally problematic stories and pictures of God. So anyway, it should be kind of fun to check out next week. All right, that's pretty much it. I hope you have a great week, and we will see you next time. Bye.